Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Rag & Bone Man called Human. You know, of all the acts that I have covered on this show, especially in recent months, courtesy of you folks on Patreon, this is arguably one to which I've been looking forward to the least. Yeah, I know, that's a harsh allegation, especially for an act who's currently racking up hits in the UK and Europe and indeed around the world. But that's indeed part of the issue. Unlike most people, I knew about Rag & Bone Man, real name Rory Graham, back a couple years ago, and I was not surprised to see a significant push behind him now, especially in the wake of rougher artists like, say, Hozier blazing the trail for bluesier acts having success in the charts. Hell, in an episode of Billboard Breakdown, I used every possible excuse in the book to avoid even talking about Rag & Bone Man as a world hit, even calling him a Hozier ripoff, which, of course, got me a lot of flack from people who told me that he actually predates Hozier. He'd been pushing out EPs since the early 2010s, and of course, you guys were all fans back then, right? But believe it or not, I actually did know about this, mostly through his affiliation with a few smaller British hip-hop acts. But that indeed might have been part of the problem for me. Hozier, he trended toward more blues and gospel, rougher genres that demand grit and a darker brand of howling soul that I really came to love. And while Rag & Bone Man, while he was capable of that sort of sound, most of his earlier EPs played closer to neo-soul and pushed him into his smoother, buttery upper register with his voice and featured hip-hop guest verses. He was clearly going in a very different direction on those EPs. And then Hozier's self-titled debut album sold over 1 million copies worldwide for Island, and you could tell that all those major labels wanted to have at least somebody who could compete in similar territory. Atlantic had Ed Sheeran, who was even bigger. Interscope had Imagine Dragons, sort of, although Smoke and Mirrors in 2015 would not help their cause. Republic snatched up James Bay, who would go on to make Let It Go, an adult alternative hip and not a good one. And Columbia, well, here's the thing. They were distributors for Hozier. They didn't really need another act to play at this lane while Hozier worked on his sophomore project, unless they were looking for R&B neo-soul crossover, which I kinda doubt. And yet here we are with Rag & Bone Man, whose breakout single Human you can largely thank Hozier for in popularizing that style, especially in the UK. But hey, I do like Hozier, and even though I didn't really care for Human, maybe Rag & Bone Man might be able to capture some of that similar magic on his full-length debut. It had to be possible. It couldn't be that bad, right? Well, okay. Might as well get this over with. I did not care for Human, the album or the song. And unfortunately, the reasons I didn't care for the album is for many of the same reasons I didn't like the lead-off single. I'm not going to deny that Rory Graham is a ridiculously talented and expressive singer, but his debut album, Human, has the sterile feel of being micromanaged by a major label looking to cash in on a sound by watering it down rather than refining it. From the instrumentation, especially the production, to a lot of the writing. It's the sanitized, accessible version of modern blues and soul, and no matter how much I might find Rag & Bone Man an impressive presence behind the microphone, and I do, that's not what I want to hear when I listen to blues and soul, damn it, especially not in this sort of package. I want some fire, I want some darkness, and I don't get it here. Well, you know what? Before I really dig into my issues with this project, I want to highlight the unequivocal positive. Rory Graham himself. I've made the Hozier comparison plenty of times, and spoiler alert, the parallels of what goes right and wrong on their debuts is so stark it's going to be impossible to avoid, but Graham is arguably an even stronger and more versatile vocalist, able to jump from full-throated howls to smoother John Legend or Nate Dogg-esque crooning, to a pretty decent falsetto, to even a rapped verse on Ego that reflects a hint of unique personality that the label didn't manage to sandblast away. And make no mistake, you can tell his producers, they know that Graham is the biggest asset they have on this project, so they give him center stage and as many overdubs and theatrical swell as he could possibly want, lending this record an elegance and a swell that is indeed palpable, but I'm not sure it's the production that really flatters him, or a lot of his content. His sort of raw, textured vocals, they respond well to grit and lo-fi pickups, and production that tempers and accentuates that bite. And yet, the pickups here, they seek to place him on a much cleaner stage, and that strikes me as a real misstep. And while part of this, it does fall on Graham. For as much power and composure as he has, I don't find him a particularly subtle or nuanced vocalist, which can definitely undercut his natural charisma, but the production, that's the much bigger problem here. And unfortunately, it also applies to the rest of the instrumentation. And here's the thing. A voice like Rag & Bone Man's, at its best, it works against the rougher grooves that he can keep pace with him. Firmer bass lines, guitar and keys that hold that melodic groove, and organic percussion that can match it all and keep things going, accentuate those hooks. And yet, on average, Rag & Bone Man maybe gets 1 out of 3 consistently on these songs. And while this project does have a couple of tracks from previously existing EPs, they're not enough to be a credible excuse for the wild shifts in tone and production quality that occur on this album. The biggest issue, I've already alluded to it. If you were expecting instrumentals to match Graham's voice for texture and bite, well, you'll find a few credible moments, but nowhere near enough to really fill out this project. Most because the bluesy elements that come through most in the bass lines and the vocals, not so much in the too sparse guitars that don't really support enough melody, and especially not in the percussion, which nearly always feels programmed and a lot stiffer than it has any right to be. That's before you factor in the pianos and the string sections and the horn sections and all the songs like Be the Man and As You Are that want to sell this project to John Legend's audience of all people. And that doesn't really work, half because John Legend's smooth, natural charisma, that works for that sort of production, and that because a lot more of that material has a looser, more live feel to balance out the polish. When John Legend, when he wants percussion, he gets Questlove and the Roots, not the stiffer drum machines that serve as percussion on this project. That's where we get the jarring contrast in tones between some of the otherwise decent bass lines and then some beats that feel so muddy and clunky as all hell, which certainly don't fit with the strings or the horns that are tuned clean by half to blend all that well. Now, that's not saying that there aren't a few good hooks. Bitter End, particularly in the piano line, parts of Human before that beat switch, I'll give it that. I understand why it's the lead single. And yes, there is some decent momentum behind Grace, even if it does feel too clean by half. Hell, the best song here is Arrow, which is like a swinging 70s soul cut. It actually feels pretty well blended. It has got a good hook. But let's be real here. On an album of that era, it would be a deep cut. At best, it's far from spectacular. And the only other song that I would argue has serious quality to it is Die Easy. And it's a cappella. You don't even need to worry about bad mixing in the instrumentation when there isn't any. Of course, this is where we have to look at the lyrics. And look, it's not really Rag & Bone Man's fault that this record was sandwiched on my schedule between Jamie Wyatt, Ed Sheeran, and Sun Kill Moon, all of whom are bringing more detail and character and thematic consistency and style to their writing. Graham, he isn't even close to the same ballpark as someone like Hozier, half because these songs feel so basic in a lot of their word choice and poetry, but more because the themes and subject matter at best feel misplaced and at worst are kind of condescending and more than a little bit insufferable if you dig into it. And again, if you dig into Hozier's writing, he could fall towards similar territory, but not only was he self-aware about it, but he played into the stories through a lot of his framing and through tongue-in-cheek wry commentary, which earned a lot more of the drama and indeed some of the melodrama. He made those songs work by owning them. And yet, from the very first track, Human, the sentiment for Rag & Bone Man is a complete denial of any sense of responsibility or investment. The usage of the word blame is important. It calls to mind the attitude of self-righteous deflection that is all over this album, and worse still seems to be embraced wholeheartedly in a lot of his relationships, and that's not a good sign. And the next 3 songs, indeed, we get pictures of bad relationships that should all end for as torturous as he describes them on the verses, and yep, in each case, he throws a Hail Mary to try and save something for love, I guess. It really feels self-serving. And sure, you could call it melodrama. He's certainly trying to sell it through his delivery, but when the instrumentation often can't match that bombast, and there's no real flair in the writing or any sense of self-awareness, it's just not likable. It's just more kind of whiny. Or take Be the Man, where he's trying to open up, and she wants this girl to trust him in his vulnerability, but in the second verse he says, I don't have to say a word to you. Like, I get the sentiment of unspoken trust behind that phrase, but I'm not sure it's earned here, and that phrasing is not good. At least there is a breakup on Grace, but instead of actually reflecting on his mistakes that caused it, he just brushes it all aside by saying, we're all one step away from Grace. He seems more concerned with how this girl will remember him. The optics, not actually learning something about his behavior. He gets a lot lot worse on Love You Any Less, where it seems like he wants her to confess her mistakes and says that he won't love her any less because of them. How is that even on the table, you have to wonder. But then in the second half of the chorus he says, "Don't hide behind me, you're strong enough to face the fall." I'm sorry, this is not an expression of support in any sort of sane relationship. It's self-serving in a really ugly way. And it definitely comes through on Ego, which is a diss track for some unknown arrogant figure. And not only are a bunch of the rhymes flubbed in the rap verse, it's the last thing I want to hear from Rag and Bone Man and this sort of artist, especially when he's trying and failing to come across as a tortured soul. It's also why songs like Arrow, As You Are, and Die Easy probably work the best on this project. Pretty straightforward in the writing, to be sure, with the latter being a pretty decent bluesy send-off as he dies, but the emotional stakes are smaller and they're more approachable. He can actually achieve them. But even with all that faint praise, I did not like this. And I don't even get why so many of the songs end abruptly, or how so much of this feels like a mashup of influences that don't compile into a unique sound. This isn't interestingly diverse, it's a mess. I'm not denying that Rag and Bone Man is a potent singer, but this screams of a major label getting him to cobble together a collection of songs for a debut that don't flow and don't nearly show off writing that's unique, distinctive, or likable. Even by the standards of melodrama, there's just not much flavor here beyond the vocals. And go beyond that, you find that it paints our frontman as self-serving, whiny, and really kind of obnoxious, which doesn't remotely fit his style and delivery, which is way more sincere. In other words, it's a 4 out of 10, no recommendation. It doesn't seem like the States has any interest in this guy, given that while he did well around the rest of the world, he landed at number 126 on the Billboard 200, so I guess for once the States is doing something right. But everyone else, look guys, better singer-songwriters than this guy, just coming out in this past week. I'd skip this project. You'd be better off for it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I don't know if this guy has a lot of fans. Who knows, might even end up seeing this review. But if you want to buy the record, the link is in the description below. And if you guys want to vote on it and tell me how wrong I am, there's the poll right there. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right there, where once a week or 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week on Saturdays you guys get to add records to my schedule in the higher Patreon tiers. You want more details and information, or if you're a new upcoming artist who wants to ensure your record gets on my schedule, there's the link. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.